Thank you, Amit. Yeah, I wish we had more time, but that had to be rushed towards the end. So, however, I'd also like to welcome the rest of the speakers and the contributors to this session to join us in this discussion. We have a question that I think would fit quite well in one of your slides earlier, and so I can address that first to you, and we will welcome the other presenters to give their feedback. So one of the questions that we receive from the participants is that they understand the socioeconomic benefits, environmental benefits, but one general challenge I would say is that the market price of EV is too high to be marketed to the public. So if it's not affordable, what would be the different steps to overcome that challenge? And so I guess we can perhaps see, based on the experience of India, I see there are a lot of policies that are being developed to do that, to make it affordable or to support the manufacturing. Does the cost reduction also translate to the users? And could you tell us a little bit more about that? And how do you make it affordable for consumers? Yeah, so that's a question. And later on, we'll have the rest of the panelists to also share their thoughts on that.
Absolutely. And I think this is a very important question. What we have seen actually in India is there are many form factors. So because typically when we talk about electric mobility, we usually associate it with electric cars. But 75% of the vehicles which are sold in India are not electric cars, they are two-wheelers. And electric cars in excess of $20,000 are less than 2% of the overall fleet. So the point is there are already a lot of form factors which are conducive for electrification. So two-wheelers, three-wheelers, fleet, paratransit, and public transit. Even with the high upfront cost, they have a lower life cycle cost. So that's one. The second is the personal automobile, a personal car. And I think I totally agree with the response there from Noman, is that I think we should stop looking at electrification of personal car for now. We have enough use cases to demonstrate that two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and public transport can be the catalytic vehicle segment that can drive electrification, but also help in decarbonizing transport.
Great. Are there other insights from the other speakers on that note, like based on your work, or for example, in Singapore, do you also have such policies and regulation, or from the Wuppertal side, are there different framework that we could explore or communicate with the different national and local representatives here with us today on how do we make EVs affordable, what do we need to prioritize, and how do we plan for that? Who should go ahead?
Maybe if Eugene has something to say first, and then maybe I can also after him.
Yes. So for Singapore, I think we recognize that this concern is very real. That there's a price differential between electric vehicles and ICE vehicles, internal combustion engine vehicles. So what we're doing in Singapore, I think based on our own research and our own modeling also, we are expecting that there would be some degree of price convergence by 2025. Just by looking at the trends in the battery prices, because the battery price actually makes up about, I think, 1/3 of the cost of the electric vehicle. So given that it's just a matter of time that the convergence will happen within the next 5 years, and in the meantime, we actually do need to get people on board, because there's no point to build infrastructure if nobody's going to use it. So actually, we do need some early adopters. So what we are doing for these early adopters is we have introduced a couple of incentives to help to just narrow the price differential between electric vehicles and internal combustion engine vehicles, just to make it a little more attractive for buyers of new cars to choose electric vehicle rather than a conventional internal combustion engine vehicle. So that is what we've done on our own part, and we expect that by 2025, these price differentials would have narrowed, and and with sufficient infrastructure and a support network everywhere, as well as the benefits of knowing that they are contributing to less carbon emissions, then people will naturally then at that point gravitate towards electric vehicles. So that's how Singapore is dealing with the issue. Thank you.
Very interesting insights. I think there's
Yeah.
Yeah, Alvin. Okay.
Yeah,
There you go.
Kathleen, maybe just to add to what Amit and Eugene has mentioned, it's very important. I think Eugene mentioned a very important point there in terms of filling in this this gap. No? I think from a wider technological perspective, there are a lot of things happening in terms of let's say the battery markets. There are a lot of studies that are forecasting that within the next years up to 2030, we're going to be seeing substantial reductions of the battery prices from around I think 300 to 250 USD per kilowatt hour in 2018 to around less than 100 within the next 10 years or so. But we cannot just rely on these wider market developments, and this is where I think the strategies and policies in terms of covering for the price differentials would really play a key role. Let me just share, for example, in the Philippines, the company that we're working with, Tojo Motors, has also always been telling us that there are big investors that are interested in putting more money in terms of EV and local battery manufacturing, but the proof for the significant demand is needed, and this is what they're trying to consolidate and trying to do some analytics on. So the incentives and overarching policies that would stimulate the demands in terms of subsidies, tax breaks, operational incentives for EV users, owners, fleet operators can really help. Alternative means of financing would also be very important. Looking at sharing the financial risks should also be explored. I think in India this has been a popular or a growing model in terms of promoting electric buses in fleets, the gross cost contract model. Wherein the purchase of the e-buses the financial and operational risks are shared between the bus agency and the technology supplier, and a fixed price per kilometer is issued regardless of the ridership. So I mean, in this model, somehow it takes the burden out of the outright purchase model, and the financial risks are also shared. And then there are other innovative financing mechanisms that are up and coming in terms of components leasing, electric vehicle leasings, and as well as service models. And then we look into the possibility or really the mindset of not isolating e-mobility itself, but leveraging with other types of innovations. As mentioned earlier, the digital transformation and the integration of sharing services provides a lot of opportunities in terms of sharing resources and looking at additional revenue streams. So, things like digital advertising on all these things. So we're seeing these in a lot of the emerging eMaaS platforms and e-shared types of services that are up and coming in the region as well. So thank you.
Sunny, I see your hand raised. You can also.
Yeah, thank you so much. Just to add to that, in terms of deploying the electric or increasing the uptake of EV adoption, what experience shows us from at least the European countries where there is a high uptake, say, for example, Norway or even China, for example, is there has been a lot of incentives that are put forward, the fiscal incentives, so that the price difference between the EV and a conventional vehicle is reduced, so that people it's easier for them to choose between an EV and a non-EV. And at the same time, because it needs to work from all sides, because governments also need to concentrate or focus more on the fuel economy standards and the CO2 standards, because in the sustainable transport world, we call them push and pull mechanisms, where you implement TDM. So the same applies also for electric mobility uptake. You need to have a push from conventional and a pull into the EVs. And for a start, fiscal incentives bring to a certain extent, but then at one point the incentives need to stop, and then the market has to go on its own. So this is for a country that is beginning to start with EV, fiscal incentives make a lot of meaning.
So give me a second here. I am just checking the time. So we are nearing the end of our 3-hour session, in fact, it's the end. However, it's all right with the panelists and for the speakers. Could we just stay on for a little bit, maybe for a maximum of 20 more minutes, just to welcome the discussions that we have been receiving in the chat box? Is that all right? No objections. Okay, so okay, great. I see thumbs up. All right, so we'll continue a little bit here. And indeed, there's a need to have incentives that are targeted to actually, how do we significantly bring the costs down for the users, for different stakeholders. And I have a question here that is about generally the ecosystem and stakeholders. So we have been talking about that in this module, the different stakeholders. And I have a question here that we hope could also shed light on the role of the ministries that are involved in land use and planning, and other city planners that are here with us today. On tackling the range anxiety, how do we address this challenge now on range anxiety and then traveling traveling with the longer distance with just one full charge? How do we address that? And in terms of their role also, maybe you could also give us some thoughts on that. Would anyone like to start? Rushan, go ahead.
Sorry, did you ask me to go ahead?
Yeah, okay. So I saw I raised hand here.
I had my hand raised earlier for that earlier question about the higher upfront cost. I think I'll just answer that briefly.
Yes, okay.
I think three things need to be considered here. Yes, we all agree that EVs have a higher upfront cost right now. Okay? But first, as my friend from Singapore just said, that the cost is coming down, and we feel that within 5 or 6 years, that the cost will become on par with fossil fuel vehicles. So mid-20s is what people are saying, maybe 26, 27. So which basically means there's this 5-year window for which EVs might require some support in terms of upfront cost. But to provide that, okay, I think that's where the government can play a role in doing two things. One, talk about the total cost of ownership that Amit talked about. If you talk about the total cost of ownership, then in some cases it's lower, in some cases it's still higher, maybe. Okay, but it covers the gap a little bit. The second, I think, most important, particularly for public transport vehicles, is if we factor in cost of environmental cost, health cost, cost to the economy, cost to the society in general, and that is savings by the state, by the society, that the state can and has a moral obligation to support. So particularly the upfront cost, it could support that. And what the benefit goes beyond the emission reduction, the health improvement. Normally what we want is a higher uptake of public transport vehicles. If you look at Amit's graph with this, GDP versus, emissions, one particular point was way down, one city, that was Hong Kong. Okay, and what's interesting about Hong Kong is 85% of the trips are made in public transport, and the reason of that happens is a very well, managed public transport system with electric mobility thrown in the mix there, with electric buses, which are generally more comfortable, less noise, less vibration, and so on. I think you can also start talking about improving the public transport ridership, and particularly with less operating cost. I think that will be more sustainable. As a public transport operator, our main reason to go to electric vehicles is the lower operating cost, and I think that will make our system sustainable. And so, if you consider those factors and provide the necessary support early on, particularly for the next 5-6 years, I think it will help in really, the early adopters to take on the risk, as well as in the market penetration for the EV manufacturers. Now, as far as the second question on the range anxiety, yes, it's there. Yeah, but I think a lot of times what is happening now in the EV, at least in Nepal or in other countries that I see, is that a lot of times EV is looking, people are looking at urban, travel, right? So that is easily done by, a car or even a bus. When you talk about buses that, we travel about 200 kilometers or so, buses, EV electric buses can provide that range. And now with, improved charging mechanisms where you have opportunity charging, you can also look at that. I think we're going to look at the charging mechanism in day 3 of this training, how you can, adjust your charging system so that you can, get rid of that range anxiety. So 2 things: 1, it's improving, and 2, I don't think it's a big issue for most cases. There's just this 1 or 2 times during the year that you have to make a 600-kilometer trip, and you don't plan your vehicles for that. You plan your vehicles for most of the days, and for that it's okay. Thank you.
Go ahead, Sunny. You also have thoughts on that?
Yeah, just on the point of range anxiety. I mean, it is an anxious thing, but in reality, so if you see the numbers, in 2015, electric car, a battery electric vehicle had a range of 200 kilometers, and now in 2020 it has about 350 kilometers. So it's a purely technological thing, because as technology develops, the range puzzle is also solved. But I second what Bhushan was mentioning, like how many people actually drive 350 kilometers every day. And for the basic urban travel, there are other options than a car. As Amit was mentioning, electrifying two-wheelers and the smaller vehicles. I mean, car is not the only option to travel. And when electric mobility is properly integrated with public transport, it's a win-win situation. You have shared electric mobility as a first or last mile connection to the public transport, and which in many cases, in many cities, is also moving more towards electric vehicles. Yes, for buses, you need to think about range and the climate, and that makes a lot of sense for bus operators to think about that. But that's also improving as technology progresses.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I remember this analogy, and I often talk about this analogy in this discussion on like the range anxiety. You know how in the past, or maybe 2 decades ago or 1 decade ago, we're used to charging our phones like maybe perhaps once a week, and then the smartphones came, and then we started charging every day. So it's like that transition actually to make people also adopt to the new technology, somehow trust technology. There's a lot of support that policymakers would have to put forward for that transition. No? So it did not happen in 5 years. It did not happen in just a year or 2. It happened for like a long time, that transition from towards the smartphones, even the standardization of the charges, etc. That's still ongoing. So now I want to put this discussion into the context of COVID pandemic. We have a question here. Maybe perhaps Nansing, in India, could give us a bit more insight on this one. How has COVID changed the trajectory for future mobility development in your countries? Like, given that perhaps there have been plans that were set up pre-pandemic, did the pandemic somehow change this, or how did it actually perhaps accelerated that, or how has COVID changed or helped that trajectory for improved mobility in Nanjing, Singapore, and India? So I wonder who would be ready to go first. I wonder if the rest are still here. So we still have Yutin in the call. I wonder if Amit is okay. Nanjing, Dr. He is in the call. So
OK， 我来回答一下。在南京呢，我分2个方面说吧，一个是区域的对外出行，一个是我们城市内部的出行。首先，从这个区域出行来说，就比如说今年的7月份，南京也是爆发了一次疫情，也是由这个境外的输入导致。其实我们目前从2021年来说，整个国内的疫情都已经得到了一个有效的控制，但是主要的挑战还是来自于境外的疫情的输入。今年的7月份，南京也是爆发了一次疫情，而且就爆发在南京的禄口国际机场。当时也是有一班是从莫斯科吧，就是俄罗斯飞过来的航班，它的那个货物上携带了这个病毒德尔塔病毒，然后在南京经停的时候，又因为就是搬运的这个还包括这保洁人员的不断的传染扩散一直到整个南京都已经得到大范围的一个扩散，然后就影响到了其他的几个省份所以呢，一旦发生了这种疫情的话，我们南京的做法就是整个机场就已经整个停运了，就不允许乘坐飞机离开南京。同时呢，我们的高铁也是只能进不能出就是可以从外面再回南京，但是你南京的，因为它需要先把南京封锁起来，不让你的疫情再往外跑所以是高铁是不让出去的。你如果一定要出去的话必须要持48小时的以内的一个核酸检测报告但是当时我们做检测的人很多，我们要求整个南京市全民都要做至少5轮以上的核酸检测，至少5轮，包括我自己也是做了，到现在应该做了有8轮左右了它检测包括2种，一种叫混合检测，就是为了提高效率，是让10个人一组来去检测，这样子的话，就是如果10个人里面这个混合的样本发现有问题，它才会再找出去复检另外呢，就是那种一个一个的去检测然后我们再回到交通的这个问题刚才说的一个是机场停下来了，然后高铁是只能进不能出然后到我们的城市内部的交通我们目前的包括我们从疫情开始到现在，我们所有的地铁城市的地铁它的这个都是需要测量体温的测量体温然后我们的常规公交不好意思稍等不好意思我们的常规公交呢也是上去的时候它都是实名制的，就是我们所有的公共交通都需要实名制，一旦后面出现了比如说你的同乘乘客发现有疫情之后，它可以通过我们的手机数据、公交的刷卡数据，包括你的出行的轨迹，来去把你这个影响的人给找出来，然后再去进行进一步的隔离然后我们当时南京疫情的时候，小汽车也是不让出去的它会把整个南京对外的高速公路、国省干道都设关卡然后如果说没有持健康检测证明的，都不允许离开南京然后内部的话，就是包括我们的出租车和网约车也是要求我们的司机每天要测量体温、实名登记如果他有异常，他是不允许代客的我们的乘客同样也是要求有这样的检测的证明，才允许乘坐公共交通大概就是这样子谢谢。
So thank you so much for that insight, Dr. He. Indeed, globally, I feel that the public transport sector has been quite hit by the pandemic. So there have been a lot of ways for them to cope and reopen, and the different technologies and the systems, even the process by which they will welcome passengers, it had also changed in a lot of cities globally. But how about for like India and Singapore? How has COVID changed the trajectory of a mobility development there? Like, how has it shifted based on local mobility challenges that were seen during the pandemic? So maybe we can start off with Amit. Do I still see him in the call? I will check. Otherwise, we could go first to Yutin. So I have them here in the session still. I'm just going to go through the. So the question is on like how had COVID changed the future of mobility development? I don't see Amit in this session. However, could we check with Singapore if that had somehow impacted the way that these plans have developed or over the last 2 years? So, or is this still, given that it's relatively a city-state and a smaller country, is that still the same set of plans that you had pre-pandemic? Okay, so had there been a change in the priorities of the governments? I guess that's the insight also that I'd like to check here.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. For having Singapore share our thoughts on this as well. Certainly, I think the COVID-19 pandemic, has ravaged public transport systems worldwide, and Singapore is no exception. We are not spared. So for us, how we typically characterize this as a revenue crisis. Why we call this a revenue crisis is because riders just literally vanish off of the system, and basically with no riders, there's no revenue, and even then we still have to incur all the costs in running the public transport system. So then how has this changed the equation for us in Singapore here? And I think we're not immune to all the research and the studies or the opinions that are published by leading opinion editorials worldwide. And I think we also recognize that after this pandemic is over, if it even ends in the first place, is that a certain base load of people will work remotely from home for good. And basically, the way that we have envisaged our public transport system before the pandemic will no longer apply going forward. So this has caused us to actively review our transport plans. What are we doing on the public transport side is we are exploring, instead of fixed route buses, now we are looking even more strongly at dynamically routed buses. On the thinking that dynamic routed buses, it brings people from where they want to, from where they are to where they want to go, and more efficiently, and it's more targeted, and also if you provide such a good quality of service, then actually people may be willing to wait for a bit longer than if you make them wait for a fixed route bus. So these is for example some of the things that we are looking at it with a bit more urgency. Now, at the same time, I think we also recognize that this pandemic has also taken a lot of cars off the road. So we're also looking at road repurposing projects. How can we reclaim some of the road space for say active mobility, for example, for bicycles, or maybe not even bicycles, maybe even for lush greenery. So maybe instead of road or one lane for road, that space could be used as a green strip instead. You could plant some trees on there, make the city a bit more livable, a bit more pleasant, a bit more beautiful. So these are definitely things that we're looking at, and certainly it's definitely not a business as usual from the pre-pandemic state that we were in. We are actively reviewing our plans, and it's a bit of a rush also because a lot of these plans, we're almost on the verge of like constructing them, and we have really had to hold them back and say, no, we have to take a long hard look at this. Do we really still need this at this point in time? All this massive capex investments on infrastructure, do we still need to put in all that money? Will the world still be the same after the pandemic? And will all this capex investment, we did all this cost benefit analysis before the pandemic struck us. So yes, if you say, if business as usual is going to materialize, then yes, this infrastructure will definitely be warranted, and the investments, will give you a return on investment. But with the pandemic, it has changed everything for us, and we have to redo all our computations. Even for like new railway lines, we need to, or metro lines, to be a bit more specific. We also have to review the design and capacity of these trains. Previously we say, maybe I have a 6-car train. Do I really still need a 6-car train now? Maybe I need a 4-car train, perhaps. So these are things that we are actively looking at as part of our studies as to how to best make use of the limited fiscal resources that we have after the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene. Interesting to see also a lot of the projects and the urban renewal projects that are happening in Singapore. That you talked about the road reclamation for the bicycles, for the pedestrians, a lot of the greeneries that are being set up there. This is quite also important as we're seeing more and more people looking to have more personal travel. Some have reservations to public transport, so it's really important to also make sure that there's more space even so now for the active travel for pedestrians and cyclists. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have left. I promised about 20 minutes max. So we are going a little bit more over time with that. We will have one more slide though, just to get a better understanding of the participants in the session. So we have about 72 participants now. Give me a second, I will show the screen. Okay, so could you go to, I wonder if this is going to load properly. Okay. Which of the following resonates the most in your country? We talked a little bit about policies. You are all coming from different sectors, and we've heard really interesting insights from the panelists today. We would just want to understand here. So we have a legal and regulatory framework for e-mobility transition. Does this resonate with you? Could you answer this in the slido.com? So open a browser and go to slido.com and type the event code 222100 and just give us an insight which resonates the most. Like, yes, several, we are just starting with it. No, not at all. We don't have any supporting mechanisms to support for the e-mobility transition, I mean. Or you could also answer if you're confident that you have in your city or in your country that, yes, we have established a framework, we are working towards implementing them. Could you give us an insight? And this will be a good segue to our discussion in the coming days. So we will touch on the policies starting tomorrow. Okay, so right now we have about 15 respondents, 16 respondents, the number is growing. Just go to another browser or your phone, go to slido.com and enter this code that you see on the screen. So a lot of the questions that we also received, we will try to follow through on those. If you would also like to reach out to the team, I believe, yeah, we will be in touch. And of course, this is not a one-off training session. There's still a lot of things to learn from, you know, the likes of India and Singapore. And because this is not just a one-year project, we will have a chance to meet again. In fact, next week, you've heard about the city trainings that are starting next week with Kathmandu. Kathmandu, and then Hanoi the week after, and then Pasig the week after. And actually just a month ago, just a month ago, we also kicked off the Nanjing Training Center. So we're happy to have them here with us. A lot of delegates also from China joining us, either via Zoom and I believe from another live stream channel. Huh? So again, give us an insight, which of the statements resonate the most with you. You have a legal regulatory framework to support this e-mobility transition. You don't have it at all, or you are just starting. So we are seeing that 67% of you say that you are just starting with this. So I'll give it maybe a minute more. Just go to slido.com and enter the event code 222100. So a lot of the cities, no? So even if we don't see the end of this slide, I believe we're seeing where a lot of the cities and countries are at now with regard to e-mobility. And it's great that we have this kind of learning session also to learn from the likes of India and Singapore through Amit and Eugene. Thank you so much for your for the case examples that you have provided, and also to Alvin and Sunny for giving us the foundation of this session. Okay, I see more entries coming. Okay, maybe a few more seconds, just maybe up that to 30. We're waiting for at least 2 more. Okay, so otherwise, we will stop here. If there's nothing, no one adding more inputs to this, can I ask a colleague of ours to take a screenshot of this output? I will also do the same. Super. So I will go to the next slide now and end the poll, okay? So that's all, unfortunately, the time we have for the first module, the day 1. And thank you so much again. It's been a pleasure for me, you know, listening and learning from this discussion. And we hope that you already have clear takeaways from day 1. However, do join us tomorrow for another session on EVs and policies. So Steffi from UN Habitat will guide you through the session tomorrow as your moderator for day 2. So you'll hear more about policy instruments for generating demand and supply. You will hear about the specific focus on electric 2- and 3-wheelers in Asia. So we'll hear from UNEP on that. And we'll hear a different set of case examples tomorrow to understand, like, how are they preparing for e-mobility through different policies. So, you know, we've heard several today, so we'll hear more on the more specific, I would say, EVs and different policy frameworks from different cities. Great. So on the 3rd day, Shritu will join you as your moderator. She's also here with us. She's from Wuppertal Institute. And the day 3 will focus on the charging infrastructure, specifically the different characteristics of charging infrastructure. How do we plan for that? What are different policies and different policy framework and prerequisites for that, and aspects and operation? I believe we also received several questions when you registered that could be addressed on day 2 or 3 more appropriately. So with that, once again, I'm Kathleen, and I'm very pleased to meet you all and interact with you through this session. And on behalf of Solutions Plus project, we would like to thank our contributors and speakers who joined us on this session. So thank you so much for joining us and see you tomorrow.